welcome. On behalf of GW Law's Environmental and Energy Law Program, I'd like to welcome you to the third of our series on careers in the fields. I'm very delighted to welcome our audience today and to thank you for tuning in with us. I especially want to welcome our guests for today, with both GW Law alumni, Dan Vinnik and Boris Shkuta. Before turning to the introductions, I do want to also remind you that we will have 2 more weeks of this scheduled and coming up. There will be 2 webinars on each of the following 2 Fridays. On March 4th, we'll be addressing ESG practices and that practice with Jacqueline Yap from Kirkland & Ellis. At 3 p.m., we'll be talking with 2 folks who are at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management at the Department of Energy. On March 11th, our noon program will be about law in the corporate suite. And then at 3 p.m., we will have an overview of the many facets of energy law practice with Adrienne Clare at Thompson Coburn, who's also a former president of the Energy Bar Association. Tapes of these interviews are being made available. This is being taped. We will have those available on our YouTube channel. You can just Google, look for GW Law Environmental Energy Law Program, and you'll find it. And there's an entire series there. If you subscribe, you'll get all the ones that come along in the future. During the course of this discussion today, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, not into the chat, and we will try to get to as many of those questions as we can. I also do want to take a moment here just to pause and acknowledge the situation in Ukraine. I know it's heavy on the minds of all of those who are here on the panel today. And just want to express that our thoughts and hearts are with all those who are affected, wherever they are located. With that, I would like to turn to our program. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome 2 of my former students. They met in law school, they became friends, and then took very different career paths. So today they're here to talk about what that means and what their careers look like. Boris Shkuta is an associate at Bracewell LLP in its DC office. His practice focuses on electric power and transmission regulatory work and energy storage technologies. He also advises clients on matters related to lending, project finance, mergers and acquisitions, infrastructure and development, and primarily in the energy industry. Dan Vinnik is an attorney advisor at the Office of General Counsel at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. He'll have to describe in detail his work because it's very varied. I will note that Dan will be speaking only in his personal capacity as a GW alum. His statements do not reflect any views of the commission, any office in the commission, or the commissioners themselves, although I'm sure he may also have to give his own disclaimer. With that, I want to turn to welcoming Boris and Dan.
Thank you very much for having us. Really excited to be here. Like you noted, it is a tough time for both Danny and I, coming from Russian and Ukrainian heritage. So it is something that's on our minds. Having said that, excited to be here, excited, we love talking about ourselves. We love talking to each other about ourselves. We love arguing with each other. So this should be hopefully a good time for everyone involved.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for having us, Donna.
You're very welcome. And I'm glad you're coming out of the box with your gloves up, Boris. Nothing less than what I expected.
Yes.
So I want to start, and Boris, let's start with you. Talk to us a little bit about what your day is like. You're in private practice. Do you plan your day? What happens? What goes on?
Sure. I think the term that you might hear most often in our office is ebbs and flows. I think that really defines what our workflow looks like and what our day-to-day looks like. You can go from 0 to 100 back to 0 within the course of a day, within the course of a couple days. And it's kind of hard to predict what can come in on any particular day. But that kind of creates for an exciting environment. It creates for an environment that can lead to your development relatively quickly. I think when I started in 2019, I started just before the pandemic hit. And my first year, I was actually extremely quiet. I think there was a lot of changes going on. I was still a first year. First years tend to kind of like, it takes a while to ramp up, to get a lot of work in. But then once the second and now the third year has started to settle in, you get really busy. And I will say that, when you are busy, even though that's more challenging, even though that's more difficult, you learn more, you develop more, you find yourself being able to, you don't even realize, but a couple months in, someone asks you a question about PURPA and you thought you didn't know anything about it, and you start using terms, you start throwing out, qualifying facilities, and, you just find yourself talking in a way that you didn't really expect. And I think that that kind of challenging environment really helps in that development. So in terms of more specifics on my day-to-day, I think, and I meant to, Don, and I apologize, I should have sent you an updated overview and bio of what I work on, but I think my practice is focused on energy regulatory work, and it's split about 50-50 as a whole between electric power work, regulatory work, and then oil and gas work, specifically natural gas, really more so than oil. And so the day-to-day can really be anything from filing pleadings and making filings with the commission, with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So, whether it's kind of more of like a litigation matter. So if there's like a complaint and there's a dispute between several regulated entities, or it's just kind of regulatory filings, like in connection with an acquisition, you just make a filing to let the commission know that, you're purchasing something or you're selling something. And sometimes it's kind of advising also on regulatory issues associated with an acquisition. So it might not be directly making a filing with FERC, but it might be reviewing, a purchase agreement and flagging issues for the deal attorneys and letting them know, hey, we think this might cause issues. This might cause regulatory issues down the road. We think like this is the kind of exposure that you might have if you don't change this provision. This is what you're required to do after the deal closes. And so I think that kind of covers the broad gamut of it. But on a day-to-day, I think ebbs and flows is really what covers it. You can go from really busy to really quiet, back to really busy. And I think that's kind of one of the defining characteristics of firm life.
Dan, can you weigh in and tell us a little bit about what your days look like?
Sure. And I'll start off by saying that I do work for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but I am here, as Donna said, in my personal capacity, just as a GW alum, and my statements do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of FERC or any FERC office or any FERC commissioner. Now, with that out of the way, I work at FERC in the Office of the General Counsel in the Energy Projects division. And so our day-to-day really focuses more on, or my day-to-day focuses more on construction work and infrastructure projects. And so that side really can be up to 50-50 in a hydropower, in the hydropower sector or in the natural gas sector, being the two main areas that I have had experience in. And I would say that ebbs and flows, as Boris said, is actually a very apt description, even for government work. In my experience, you can have projects that are pretty far out there, but sometimes things happen to fall within the same month or within the same time frame, and you'll go from kind of having a relatively open schedule to having a lot on your plate at once. But I think that one of the differences that you have working in government is kind of how scheduled out things tend to be. And I'll say that, in the infrastructure sector, FERC, we do work, from the cradle, from the cradle to the grave of a project. So from the inception of the planning stages, we're reviewing applications, sometimes working with applicants to get their project started. And when a project is at the end of its life, that applicant will come to FERC for abandonment or surrender of the project. And so we have the full life of the project there. And I would say, though, that because it is a regulatory body and we have this, we benefit from regulatory certainty, and these projects, they're scheduled out over long terms. So I will say that our projects tend to not, fall from the sky, or at least in my experience, the work doesn't just fall from the sky out of nowhere and have to be done today. It is, ahead of time, you have your time to work on it. And that gives a lot of breathing room, I think, for new employees to learn and not feel overly micromanaged. I know when I first started at FERC, I felt like I had a lot of autonomy to take a project and look at it myself and, come to my own head. And of course, there were mentors to guide me in any way I want and anything I needed help with. But I really felt like I had the time to get comfortable and make a project feel like it was, like mine, like I was familiar with it. I knew I had spent enough time reviewing it, and that really helps, plan out your schedules, your months, your days. I think that in my experience, the government has been just really, really considerate of vacation days and off days. Today, for instance, is my off day because I get one every 2 weeks, just as part of the flexible schedule. And, you know, people at the government are really considerate of respecting your time that you have, you know, that you have scheduled to be off. And so in that way, I think the predictability, although we do have ebbs and flows, and there's definitely, you know, feasts and famine periods, but I think the predictability might be a little more certain on the government side.
Boris,
And
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add, I also should mention that as part of my practice, I do bankruptcy litigation work, which is an interesting element of how work at the government may not be as bread and butter as the description was, because the government, you know, has to do what's coming to it. And so there may be really interesting opportunities, ones that weren't necessarily, you know, in the maybe job description as most people have it. And that kind of opportunity, doing that kind of litigation work has definitely has a different pace and candor to it than the regulatory work that I do on the project side. So I'll just note that difference between different types of work you can get at the government.
Yes, I actually, I'm not sure if either of you heard this, but I do tell energy students do take bankruptcy. Um, it is, as we've moved to a market economy, it does have its ups and downs. Boris, do you want to comment further on that pace of the day and kind of how the pressures are? And I also noted that Danny talked about mentoring. Any comments on those topics?
Sure. I can head off there. I mean, in terms of the pacing, I mean, I do think I kind of touched on it in a general sense, but I think one of the expectations when you work at a firm is that you're always on, and that can be, you know, easier or more challenging depending on the time of year. You know, it's sometimes for me, I think, you know, I went into big law kind of with my eyes, I think, pretty clear. It's like, okay, like here's the trade-offs. Like I get to work for a big firm. But in exchange, I have to be, you know, always responsive, and I have to be always available, and my vacation days aren't always going to be protected. Now, it actually turned out to be not as bad. I know at my firm, actually, the vacation policy is very reasonable, or like the informal policy. Everyone's been very respectful of the time I've taken off. But having said that, you know, in the abstract, it might not seem so bad sometimes, but for example, like I got married last October, which was a very exciting time. And there's a lot of things that go into wedding planning. And having, you know, that conflict with my work schedule, a lot of times I would have to choose, you know, getting projects done in time to, you know, to make sure that we are representing our clients, we're meeting deadlines. And that came at the expense of, you know, my now wife, then fiance, had to take on a lot of the work herself, and she was great about it. And she also kind of, I made sure I had conversations with her before I took on this job, kind of letting her know my understanding of the expectations. But it was kind of, I think that like, you realize you're going to have to make some sacrifices along the way. And if you have a partner, if you have family that relies on you, you want to make sure you're having those conversations ahead of time to make sure everyone's on the same page. But, you know, I think that obligation or that expectation that you're always on can come at personal sacrifices and personal costs along the way. And it tends to be, it should be fine. Certain associates, certain partners handle that better than others. But I think being aware of that and preparing for it, having honest conversations with folks in your life around it, can be a really good way to help yourself set up. And this is not to scare anyone away. Like I don't work 100-hour weeks every week. It's not as, you know, it's not that crazy. But it's just the unpredictability of it may mean, you know, that my friends also know that I'm a flake now. You know, we can make plans to go out to dinner on Thursday because my week is pretty quiet, but then, you know, Thursday, 5 o'clock comes around, I get an email, it's an emergency assignment, it needs to be turned around, and I just know that I have to do it. And it's not a complaint, it's not, you know, it's just kind of the way that it is. These are the expectations. These are the trade-offs that you made when you started. And I think like the best piece of advice I was given that I would try to impart on others, it's manageable. I think it's manageable for a lot of people. It's totally doable, but you just have to go into it with clear eyes, understanding what's going to be expected of you, being ready to take on that challenge, and preparing for it. That's really what it comes down to.
Thank you. I want to move a little bit into who you represent and how that, you know, how that develops. Dan, let's start with you. You work for the government, obviously, but who are you representing when you, what do you bring to your work, and who are you representing? What are the views?
Well, that's a really interesting and complicated question, as I think any government attorney can tell you. I remember when I took a class on this at GW, that was a whole section of it was, who are we really representing here? So, but I think that in my view, a big part of what we're representing is the public interest. And so while in some ways, you know, my client can be seen as the commission itself, which is the regulatory adjudicating body that makes the rules that I am, you know, following when I am doing any of my work. But in another sense, it is, you know, the public interest of the country at large, because the statutes are written in such a way that that is one of the primary concerns. And I think that is one of the saving graces of working at government, especially as we talk about the energy sector and the environmental sector and how these intersect, because I know many of you are probably thinking, oh, do I want to go NGO? Do I want to go government? Do I want to go private? And I'm sure that along with some of the monetary considerations and time considerations are some moral or policy considerations that you may have. And I can definitely say that I appreciate being able to work for the government, in that whenever I am doing a project and whenever I, you know, am writing out a certain policy determination or anything like that, even if it's something that maybe I wouldn't have gone with, or maybe I don't necessarily, you know, I don't think is maybe the best policy, I can feel comfortable knowing that this policy has been put in place by a democratic process, which has selected the people who, the experts who are making these decisions. And so that is something that I do appreciate, having the government representing, the federal agency, is that the positions we're taking are democratically selected to be consistent with the public interest. And I don't have to worry about, representing something that will help profit an individual, but maybe harm the public interest in that sense, because I know that our process is made democratically selected to consider the public interest there. And I'll also add that working for the government has a small benefit of the government tends to hold a lot of its positions, and we have a lot of I'll just say that working for the government, there's a good amount of consistency, I think, in the positions that we can take, and that in the stances we make, and that brings some ease to someone in the profession, knowing that they don't need to jump from view to view.
And it also must be nice, Danny, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like working in a niche area and working for a niche agency that most people don't really know about, that might kind of, and the fact that it's an independent agency, right? With 5 commissioners, that can only be fired for cause. If that, I actually don't even remember. But I think that's right. But anyways, I think that like alleviates some of the political pressures, and to a greater or lesser extent over time. But I do think that kind of makes it nice, I'm sure, that there's that continuity, that you're not, at like the Department of State, where, every time you get a new president, it might be a completely different, political situation.
That's absolutely correct. I do think that the voting body and the independence of the agency as a whole, without just a head that can switch like that, definitely helps maintain that consistency.
So Boris, I presume you have multiple clients. How does that affect your ability to be able to hop from one client to another? Do you have to change views? Do you feel that sense of you're always headed in the same direction that Dan feels?
Sure. In one sense, I think it makes it easier, because I don't have, I make decisions on behalf of someone else's interests. So my question is always, how can this best promote the interests of the client? I know that's a cliche, but it kind of makes it easier, because then I can use my my focus, my time and attention, not to kind of directing and answering their questions, as opposed to maybe for Danny, and it's like it might be more noble in a lot of ways, but like reaching your own conclusions, weighing all the pros and cons. It's that aspect of advocacy work, the same way that you have in litigation. You're advocating on behalf of the position of the client. That's your responsibility, that's your job. So you kind of you just trying to learn their situation as well as possible, and I think that makes it kind of a little bit easier. Having said that, it's also, I think, interesting because it makes you jumping around from client to client and from situation to situation. You develop a more thorough and deeper understanding of the issues because you really are forced to not just in the abstract, consider the pros and cons of a particular position, but you're really getting in the weeds every time and trying to be an advocate as best as you can be for each particular position. And I think that leads to kind of a deeper understanding of what you're working on. So I do think there are some pros to it as well, and it keeps it interesting, right? I mean, it kind of the change and the pace of change and how you can jump around from issue to issue. I think it keeps it interesting, keeps it challenging. You're not stuck in one place all the time. So I think that's an interesting component to it as well.
I would urge students who are listening, if you do want to submit questions, type them into the Q&A. We'll try to wedge in a few more because we're moving quickly towards the end of our time. I do want to also ask about career advancement. I know there's certainly many people who've gone to FERC, stayed there for 30 years. Law firms, of course, are a little bit different. There's associates and there's a partnership. Can you talk about that? And then I do think we will have at least one question to get to.
Sure, I can lead off just very quickly here. I do think being put through the ringer of a law firm job as a junior associate can help you develop quickly and use it. You can use it as a jumping off point into a variety of other areas. At least that's what I've been promised. I haven't, tested those waters out yet myself, but that's what I've been told. And so I think that even though I end up working in a niche area of the law, like energy regulatory work, I think the fact that you work for a large law firm and kind of can prove that you can stay there for several years, even if you want to, correct course for yourself, if you want to go into a slightly different industry even, or if you want to go work for an NGO or the government, I think there are certain opportunities that you can, use your background working for a firm to kind of, to build your career out in that way. Of course, you can also stay at the firm and go up to become partner if that's what you're interested in, or maybe even, a senior counsel. But staying within the firm, I think that the progression is pretty clear. Like, it's just, you spend 7, 8, 9, whatever it is, years as an associate, and then hopefully you go up to partner. But I think that's not the only way. I think if you stay here for stay at a firm for a couple of years, you can then use that experience to really branch out and go into other areas of the law if that's what you would like to do.
Dan?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a similar path within the government. In my experience, from what I've seen, there are a lot of opportunities for someone at FERC or in the government to take on a big project, to show initiative, to put in, the good extra work and, the focus to show people that, hey, I'm really passionate about this. I care about this. I want to take on these difficult projects and I want to put the time in for it. And I think that that absolutely gets noticed, and that people that stay at the government and who, show the initiative can definitely move up in a similar kind of partner track sense to these long established, higher level positions at the government. But I also think that there's a good amount of movement between, from what I've seen, I've seen laterals come in from private practice where they come in and they're looking for, maybe a more regular schedule where maybe they have children now or other responsibilities, and they just don't want to have to work the same hours. And I, on the flip side, have seen people have left FERC after, getting that government training in the beginning and moved into private practice. I've seen job postings for private practice that literally list as a prerequisite 2 years of FERC experience, so I definitely, I think the experience is really valuable going both ways. I think the government can appreciate someone who has kind of gone through that firm ringer and been forged in those fires. And on the other hand, that there seems to be a lot of desire from the private sector for those that have undergone the FERC training and those that, have actual knowledge of how that sausage gets made there. So I think that the opportunities and the training you get are valued at both. And I think it's precisely because they're different that they're both still valued, and why the agency likes to pick up some laterals from private, and why private likes to pick up people from the agency.
We have 2 questions out there, and I'm actually going to take them out of order. I do want to get to both of them, but one of them sort of follows. The question is jumping from private practice, big law, into a government job, or moving from a government job into private practice, which is easier? Which is recommended or not recommended? How common is it? Are there bonus structures in place to incentivize movement from one to the other, similar to clerkship bonuses? Can either of you shed any light on that question?
Very quickly, I think going from I think in terms of bonus structures for law firms, I think like right now, I think they're just giving out bonuses for new hires. You know, law firms are just giving them out to anyone who joins. So I don't know if it's just like limited to coming from the government. I don't know if there's like specific government related bonuses like there have historically been for clerkships. I do think generally I've seen, like Danny has said, I think it can go either way, and it depends on your particular. It depends, classic lawyer cliche, but it depends on your priorities. You know, I've seen people leave the firm, go to government. We just had a partner join that, you know, started as an associate at my firm at Bracewell, went to work for FERC, and now has come back as a partner to Bracewell. And that's also a path that folks can take. You know, so I think there's opportunities depending on what your priorities are at your particular stage in your career. I think there seems to be good opportunities moving between the two. I mean, I think maybe the main factor is really what the openings are at the particular time that you're interested in transitioning between the two. That might be the biggest limiting factor, unless, you know, I'll let Donna or Danny jump in.
Honestly, I think I second a lot of what you just said. It can go both ways. A lot of it depends on the opportunities you have. And I think that the biggest factor is taking advantage of the opportunities once you start working. I think that it is, if you start working and you're going to coast from that point on, I think it's going to be hard for you to make either flip. And I think that if you started working and you showed the initiative, and in a couple of years you have the resume to say, hey, look at all of these things I have done, look at the projects I've worked on, look at the initiative I've shown. I think that people on both sides would appreciate that and be happy to have it. That being said, I've never tried to leave FERC and don't really have any experience in this, so this is a little hearsay.
I can say after many years, I've seen people hop in and out both ways. So this is definitely a town with a revolving door. We are actually out of time, but if I can hold you for just a few more minutes, we do have two questions and I'd love to be able to get to them. One of them is specifically to Boris. And the question is, could you talk a little bit about pro bono energy work?
Sure. I think this will be quick because I actually haven't had much experience with doing pro bono energy work specifically. A lot of what we do when we do pro bono work is not related to energy at all. I don't know how conscious that is. For me, I think part of it is like, I like getting the opportunity to work on other issues unrelated to my main job when I work on pro bono matters. So I've worked on helping an individual that didn't have a license, never had a license in DC, get a license. I've worked on immigration matters. I've worked on, criminal matters as well. So the quick answer is I think pro bono opportunities are what you make them. And my firm is very supportive of us bringing on pro bono clients, seeking them out ourselves, and you finding what you're interested in. So I think that's the answer. I wonder if there might be complications of like conflicts of working on pro bono energy matters. I don't know because I haven't personally sought them out, again, just as a personal preference. So I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I could just chime in here from many years of experience. It's often difficult to find pro bono energy projects, although I think that is changing somewhat with the greater emphasis on energy equity and environmental justice issues that are tied to energy. So that tends to be the richer area to find pro bono work in those areas. But it's not, I don't think it's as well established as, for example, immigration law clinics or landlord tenant clinics, things where, individuals have specific problems. These tend to be more helping, for example, a group that is trying to install community solar and needs help in structuring it, a project that would help low-income people, for example. That might be an example of a pro bono project. We have another question which says, if you practice in a niche area of law, how do you ensure you are not conflicted out of issues if you want to leave your job? I'm not sure if either of you have enough experience to answer that, but can you shed any light?
I can answer quickly. I've had just, from rumblings around the office. I mean, you can't ensure that. And there have been issues where we tried to bring on a new employee and they were conflicted out and it just didn't work out. Having said that, it's not so niche that there's only, 2 clients or your 10 clients out there. It is a pretty diverse, it is a pretty large industry. And so I think like, you can't insure against it. It does come up as an issue occasionally. Having said that, my just anecdotal experience of seeing people move between jobs, leaving firms, go in-house, go work for the government, all of that, I've seen people do that easily enough that it doesn't seem to be like, you're definitely not stuck at whatever first job you get. You can definitely move around, but it can come up as an issue just like it can in other areas. So hopefully that's a satisfying answer, but that's pretty much the extent of my knowledge there.
Dan, do you have anything to add?
Second what Boris said. That's all I got.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it may be something of a niche energy regulatory law, but as we'll be exploring with Adrian Clare in a couple of weeks, energy regulatory law has transactional components, litigation components. It's a subject matter, and so it can take a lot of different forms. So I hesitate to call it a niche area. I know that's the term you used, and yes, it certainly is to anybody outside, but every company uses energy, every person uses energy. It is not so niche-y as one might think. Yes.
If I could add to that, I would say that is maybe one of the misconceptions, if I could correct, is how niche it really is. And yes, I would say maybe like 20 years ago, FERC was more of a niche agency, less heard of in the public eye. I think that as environmental concerns and considerations begin to take more of a place in FERC's review of projects, it has taken on more public attention. The climate change discussion itself has put FERC in the public eye much more than it ever has been. And so I'll just add that, especially in my experience working with energy infrastructure projects, a lot of the considerations aren't just, rate making or the really niche stuff. A lot of it is, environmental concerns that can actually have a really broad application across many sectors. And so I will say that some of the work you get, it isn't going to feel as niche as you might originally think.
And Danny, I'm sure, working on major infrastructure projects and natural gas pipeline projects, you probably have a unique perspective on Nord Stream 2 and, what's going on with the development of that. And I'm sure that that's informed your conversation with loved ones and friends and kind of added some additional perspective. So it can't be that niche, So I agree.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's important in geopolitics today. So there you go.
Well, that's certainly an interesting point on which to leave it. I think it sounds like an entirely different program. So we may have to continue on with something else. With that, I do want to wrap up because we are a little over time. And thank you both so much for your time today. It's always a delight to talk to you, but particularly on this topic, I hope that our audience has enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much.
It was our pleasure.
Thank you so much for inviting us. And feel free, everyone who's tuning in now or later, feel free to reach out, shoot us an email, shoot me an email. I won't open up Danny's time, but feel free to reach out to me.
Feel free to reach out. You go ahead.
Anytime. So thank you again, Donna, for having us. This is great.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wow.